Tonight's story is going to take us somewhere unexpected. Imagine this. Deep beneath a frozen castle in the north, something ancient waits in darkness. In a forgotten vault under a volcanic island, stone breathes with warmth that shouldn't exist. In the treasury of an exile army across the narrow sea, 3 guards stand watch over something they've protected for 100 years, never speaking of what lies behind that iron door. And in the ruins of a castle consumed by fire decades ago, beneath wild roses and fallen stones, a secret sleeps that kings died trying to protect. These aren't random mysteries. They're all connected by one impossible truth. For 3 centuries, the world believed dragons were extinct. Every history book, every maester's scroll, every legend told the same story. The dragons died. The eggs were destroyed. The age of magic ended. But what if everything we were told was a lie? What if dozens of dragon eggs, maybe 40 or more, were never destroyed at all? What if they were hidden, scattered across the known world, by maesters, knights and kings who knew a secret too dangerous to speak aloud? Tonight we're going to trace the trail of the lost Targaryen dragon eggs, from the bloody civil war that scattered them, to the conspiracy that hid them, to the places they sleep right now, waiting for fire, waiting for blood, waiting to wake. This is the story they didn't want you to know. To understand where the eggs disappeared to, we first need to understand what dragon eggs actually are. These aren't just oversized bird eggs or decorative stones. Dragon eggs are something far stranger, caught between life and death, between magic and matter. A dragon egg is roughly the size of a large melon, but far heavier. If you tried to lift one, you'd need both hands, and even then you'd feel the weight of it pulling at your arms. The surface isn't smooth like a chicken egg. It's covered in scales, tiny overlapping plates that catch the light differently depending on the angle. Some eggs are midnight black with veins of deep red running through them like lava. Others are pale cream streaked with gold, or forest green with flecks of bronze that shimmer like metal. But here's where it gets interesting. Dragon eggs are never truly cold. Even eggs that maesters declared dead, petrified, turn to stone. They retain a subtle warmth. Place your hand on one, and you'll feel it. Not hot, not burning, but warm like sun-baked rock. That warmth never fades, even after centuries. The maesters of the Citadel have debated for generations about what dragon eggs really are. Are they alive? Are they dead? Are they something in between? Grand Maester Bennifer once wrote that dragon eggs could only remain viable near the volcanic heat of Dragonstone. Take them too far away, he claimed, and they'd turn to stone, their magic seeping away into nothing. But other maesters disagreed. They'd seen eggs remain warm decades after leaving Dragonstone. They'd documented cases of eggs that seemed dead suddenly showing signs of life. The truth is, nobody really understands them. Even the Targaryens, who bred dragons for 300 years, couldn't predict which eggs would hatch and which wouldn't. Sometimes an egg placed in a cradle with a newborn prince would crack open within days, bonding dragon to rider from birth. Other times, eggs sat in the royal hatcheries for decades, never stirring, never breaking, just waiting. And that waiting, that's the key to everything. Because when the dragons died out, when the last dragon, a small sickly creature, perished in King's Landing in the year 153, everyone assumed the eggs died too. The Targaryens tried everything to hatch the remaining eggs. They brought 9 mages from across the narrow sea. They prayed over them. They placed them in fire. Nothing worked. Eventually the eggs were declared dead, useless, pretty stones, and nothing more. But what if they weren't dead? What if they were just sleeping? And what if, while the world stopped paying attention, certain people, maesters and dragon keepers and knights sworn to ancient oaths, what if they started moving those eggs, hiding them, protecting them, waiting for a future the rest of the world had given up on? That's where our investigation begins. Let's start with what we can confirm, what we know for certain. Because before we dive into the mysteries and the missing pieces, we need to establish the baseline. We need to understand which dragon eggs history actually tracked and where the official records start falling apart. The most famous dragon eggs in recent memory belong to Daenerys Targaryen, 3 eggs given to her as a wedding gift by Illyrio Mopatis in Pentos. One was black as a midnight sea, alive with scarlet ripples that seemed to move in firelight. Another was deep green with burnished bronze flecks scattered across its surface like stars. The third was pale cream, streaked with veins of gold. For months everyone treated them as expensive ornaments, beautiful but dead, petrified by centuries into nothing more than elaborate stones. Then Daenerys walked into fire, and the world changed. Those 3 eggs cracked open in the flames of Khal Drogo's funeral pyre, and for the first time in over 150 years, dragons flew above the world. We'll come back to exactly where those eggs came from later, because that story is more complicated and more incredible than anyone imagined. But for now, what matters is this. Those 3 eggs proved something everyone had forgotten. Dragon eggs don't die easily. They wait. Now let's go back further, back to when dragons still filled the skies over Westeros, when House Targaryen commanded 17 dragons at their peak, when the birth of a new dragon was celebrated throughout the realm. During the height of Targaryen power, before the civil war that would tear the family apart, dragon eggs weren't rare, they were precious, yes, but not uncommon. The female dragons laid clutches regularly. Valyrian, the pale blue she-dragon, was particularly prolific. She laid multiple clutches during her long life, eggs that ranged in color from silver to deep blue. Syrax, the golden dragon ridden by Princess Rhaenyra, also produced several clutches over the years. These eggs were kept in the hatcheries beneath Dragonstone, special chambers carved into the volcanic rock where the heat from the mountain below kept them warm. The Targaryens had a tradition. When a prince or princess was born, they'd place a dragon egg in the child's cradle. Sometimes the egg would hatch within days, bonding the dragon to the child from infancy. Prince Aegon, who would become Aegon III, had an egg placed with him as a baby. It never hatched, but he kept it his entire life, a symbol of what his family had lost. His brother Viserys carried his egg everywhere, even onto the ship that would take him into exile during the war. That egg vanished with him when his ship was captured by pirates, never to be seen again. Then came the Dance of the Dragons, the year 129 after conquest, a succession crisis that exploded into full civil war. Targaryen against Targaryen, dragon against dragon. The war lasted 2 years, and by the end, most of the dragons were dead. But it wasn't just the living dragons that suffered. The eggs, scattered across Dragonstone and King's Landing, suddenly became prizes of war, bargaining chips, symbols of legitimacy. Princess Rhaenyra, fighting for her claim to the throne, controlled Dragonstone at the war's beginning. She had access to all the hatcheries, all the eggs stored there over generations. Historical records confirm she moved several clutches to secure locations as the war intensified. Her dragon Syrax had recently laid eggs, and Rhaenyra understood their value. If she lost the war, if her line was wiped out, those eggs might be the only way dragons survived. Her stepdaughter Rhaena was given a critical mission: take 3 young princes to safety in the Vale of Arryn, protect them at all costs. But Rhaena was also given something else: 4 dragon eggs. Rhaena prayed over those eggs every night. She slept with them for warmth. During the war, one of them hatched, a pale pink dragon she named Morning. Morning would be the last Targaryen dragon to hatch for over 150 years. But what about the other eggs? The ones that didn't hatch? The ones that were in Dragonstone, when the castle changed hands? The ones aboard ships that sank during naval battles in Blackwater Bay? The war created chaos. And in chaos, things disappear. We know that at least a dozen eggs were confirmed to exist at the start of the dance. Some belonged to specific people. Some were in the royal hatcheries. Some were already old, kept as heirlooms from earlier generations. When the war ended in 131, only a handful of eggs could be accounted for. The maesters recorded 4, maybe 5 eggs remaining in Targaryen possession. That's a problem. That's a gap. Where did the others go? The official explanation was always the same. Lost in the chaos of war. Destroyed when the dragon pit burned, consumed in fires, casualties of conflict. The maesters wrote it down, the histories accepted it, and everyone moved on. But there's something you need to understand about the people who lived through the Dance of the Dragons, the dragon keepers, the servants, the knights who guarded Dragonstone. These weren't people who would casually let dragon eggs be destroyed. Dragons were their entire lives. The idea that they'd stand by and watch eggs burn, that they'd let the last hope of their species vanish into flames, it doesn't fit. It doesn't match what we know about their dedication, their oaths, their love for the creatures they'd spent lifetimes protecting. Which raises a question that historians have avoided for centuries. What if the eggs weren't destroyed? What if in the confusion of war, while castles burned and armies clashed, someone made a different choice? What if they saved them? What if they hid them? And if they did, where would they have taken them? The Dance of the Dragons began over a simple question: who should rule after King Viserys died? His daughter Rhaenyra, whom he'd named heir decades earlier, or his son Aegon, born to his second wife? That question ignited a war that would consume the realm for 2 years and kill most of the dragons in existence. By the time the war started, House Targaryen commanded about 20 dragons. Some were massive, ancient beasts like Vhagar, who'd lived for nearly 2 centuries. Others were younger, still growing into their power. And beneath Dragonstone, in the hatcheries carved into volcanic rock, dozens of eggs waited in the warmth. When Rhaenyra learned that Aegon had claimed the throne in King's Landing, she was at Dragonstone. She had immediate access to everything stored there. The castle's treasures, the ancient Valyrian weapons, and most importantly, the eggs. Her dragon Syrinx had laid several clutches over the years, and those eggs were kept in the hatcheries, maintained by the dragon keepers who'd served her family for generations. Here's what we know. She did. Rhaenyra sent her stepdaughter Rhaenyra away with 4 eggs, along with 3 young princes. That's confirmed. We have records of it. Rhaenyra took those eggs to the Vale, and eventually one hatched into morning. But Syrinx had laid more than 4 eggs over her lifetime, multiple clutches across multiple years. Where were the rest? There's a letter partially preserved in the Citadel's archives, written by one of Rhaenyra's advisors. It mentions securing the legacy and preparations for the worst outcome. The letter is dated to the first month of the war, before any major battles. It suggests that Rhaenyra, even at the beginning, understood she might lose, and if she lost, she wanted something to survive. Then the war turned brutal. Dragons fought dragons in the skies above the God's Eye. The Battle of Rook's Rest saw 2 dragons killed in a single day. The dragon pit in King's Landing became a target. A mob, led by a man called the Shepherd who preached that dragons were demons, stormed the pit. They killed 5 dragons that day, trapping them in the structure and setting it ablaze. The fire burned so hot that the dome collapsed. But here's what's interesting about the dragon pit. It wasn't just a stable for adult dragons. There were chambers beneath it, smaller rooms used for eggs and young hatchlings. When the mob stormed in, they were focused on the massive adult dragons chained inside. They killed those dragons with spears and torches and sheer numbers. But did they find the lower chambers? Did they even know to look? We have testimony from one survivor, a dragon keeper who escaped the massacre. He gave his account to a maester months later. and that account is preserved in a book called The Dance of the Dragons, a true telling. He said this, and I'm paraphrasing because the language is archaic. He said that when the mob broke in, he and 2 other dragon keepers rushed to the lower levels. They had minutes, maybe less. They grabbed what they could carry and fled through a side passage that led to the city streets. When asked what they carried, the account says only that which must not be lost. That's deliberately vague. The survivor refused to be more specific. Some historians assume he meant gold or treasures, but dragon keepers didn't care about gold. They cared about dragons. What else would they risk their lives to save in those final moments? The war dragged on. Dragonstone changed hands. Rhaenyra briefly fled there when King's Landing turned against her, but even Dragonstone eventually fell. Aedagon's forces took the castle, and when they did, they conducted a thorough search. They were looking for treasure, for weapons, for anything valuable. The official records from that search mention finding various dragon artifacts, but they never specify exactly what. No detailed inventory exists, just vague mentions of secured items that were transported to appropriate locations. Then there were the ships. At least 2 naval battles happened in Blackwater Bay during the war. Ships sank. Some of those ships were carrying members of the royal family, along with their possessions. Prince Viserys was on one such ship when it was attacked by pirates. He survived but spent years in captivity in Lys. His personal dragon egg, the one he'd carried since childhood, was never recovered. Did it sink with the ship? Was it sold by the pirates? The records don't say. By the time the dance ended in 131, the devastation was complete. Nearly all the adult dragons were dead. Morning hatched from Rhaenyra's egg was the youngest and would outlive the others, but she never grew large. A few wild dragons still existed, living in mountains or on remote islands, but they had no riders and avoided humans. The age of dragons was effectively over. King Aegon III, who took the throne after the war, became obsessed with hatching the remaining eggs. He's called Aegon the Dragonbane now, though he hated that title. He didn't want to be the king who ended dragons. He wanted desperately to bring them back. He commissioned expeditions to Ashai, to the far corners of the world, searching for anyone who knew the secrets of dragon breeding. He brought 9 mages to King's Landing, promised them anything they wanted if they could hatch even one egg. They tried everything, spells and rituals, prayers and sacrifices. They kept the eggs in constant heat. They bathed them in wildfire. Nothing worked. One by one, the eggs they had seemed to grow colder, harder, more like stone. By 153, when the last living dragon died, only 4 or 5 eggs remained in the royal collection, and those eggs appeared completely dead, petrified. No amount of heat or magic could stir them. So the maesters declared the eggs worthless. Just stones now, they said. Expensive decorations, historically significant, but no longer viable. The age of dragons had ended. But here's the thing that never quite added up. The math didn't work. At the start of the dance, there were easily a dozen eggs in various locations, probably more. By the end, the official count was 4 or 5. Even accounting for the chaos of war, that's a significant gap. 8 or more eggs just vanished from the historical record. Vanished, but maybe not destroyed. 30 years after the last dragon died, something strange started happening. Dragon eggs, the ones that had been declared dead and worthless, began disappearing. Not all at once, not in any obvious pattern, but slowly, quietly, they were removed from the places they'd been kept, and their locations became unclear. King Bela I, who ruled from 161 to 171, was deeply religious. Some would say zealous. He walked barefoot everywhere, even over broken glass and hot coals, because he believed suffering brought him closer to the gods. He fasted until he collapsed. He once tried to replace the royal executioner with a priest who would pray over criminals instead of beheading them. His reign was marked by an almost fanatical devotion to the faith of the Seven, and Bandalore believed dragons were wrong, unnatural. He never said it publicly in quite those terms, but his actions spoke clearly. He viewed the Targaryen tradition of sibling marriage as sinful, even though that tradition had preserved the dragonblood for generations. He viewed magic with suspicion, and he viewed the legacy of dragons as something best left in the past. During his reign, the few remaining dragon eggs still held by the crown were quietly removed from display. They'd been kept in the throne room, in a place of honor, symbols of House Targaryen's power. Baellar had them taken down. He said they were being moved to appropriate scholarly keeping for study. They were sent to the citadel in Old Town, where the maesters could examine them. Except the maesters didn't just examine them. The eggs arrived at the citadel, and then the trail goes cold. There are inventory records showing the eggs were received. There are records of payment to the crown for transporting them, and then nothing. No papers about what the maesters learned from studying them. No treatises on dragon biology. No updates on their condition. The eggs simply disappeared into the citadel's archives and were never mentioned in official documents again. But there are hints, fragments, pieces of a larger picture that historians have mostly ignored. In the citadel's library, there's a section called the Restricted Collection. Most maesters never see it. You need special permission from an Archmaester's Council to access those texts. The books there cover topics considered dangerous, forbidden knowledge, spells and poisons, accounts of blood magic, and somewhere in that collection, according to maesters who've spoken about it in veiled terms, there's a chamber, a vault really, with a door that requires 3 separate keys held by 3 separate archmaesters. A junior maester, writing in his personal diary in the year 201, mentioned being sent to the lower archives on an errand. He wrote that he got lost in the corridors and ended up in a section he'd never seen before. He found a door, heavy iron, with no marking except a symbol he didn't recognize. When he tried the handle, it was locked, but the door was warm. He wrote, and these are his words, "The metal was warm to my touch, as though a fire burned behind it. Though I heard nothing, I left quickly, feeling I had stumbled upon something I was not meant to see." That diary wasn't published. It was found among his possessions after his death, and eventually made its way into a private collection, but it matches other accounts. Other stories of maesters encountering locked chambers in the citadel's depths. Chambers that seemed to radiate heat in a building where most rooms were cold stone. Then there's the matter of money. The citadel's financial records, the ones that survived various fires and disasters over the centuries, show some interesting patterns. Starting around 172, just after Balor's death, there are regular payments to contractors, large payments. The descriptions are vague. Security services, transportation of materials, maintenance of special collections. These payments continue for decades, sometimes to companies in Braavos, sometimes to organizations that can't be clearly identified. One payment in particular stands out. In 175, the Citadel paid a substantial sum to a group described only as Braavosi consultants for secure storage solutions. That same year, a merchant ship captain in Braavos wrote in his log about transporting sealed cargo from Old Town. He noted that the cargo was unusually heavy for its size, and that his clients insisted on specific temperature conditions during transport. The cargo had to be kept warm, he wrote, which struck him as odd since most valuable goods needed to be kept cool. Where was that cargo going? The log doesn't say explicitly, but there's a record in Braavos from that same year. A deposit made to the Iron Bank's most secure vault. The deposit was made by an anonymous client and included items described as geological specimens of historical significance. The bank agreed to store them indefinitely under controlled temperature conditions. That deposit remains in the vault today, theoretically, though the Iron Bank refuses to confirm or deny the contents of any specific deposit. Now maybe all of this is coincidence. Maybe the Citadel really was just storing old artifacts and paying for normal security services. Maybe the warm door was near a furnace. Maybe the cargo was ordinary trade goods. But there's one more piece that makes it harder to dismiss. A letter written by an archmaester to another archmaester in 178. The letter survived because it was intercepted by a rival spy and copied before being delivered. In it, the writer discusses the matter we resolved in the previous decade. He writes, "The dangers have been appropriately secured. Future generations may judge our actions, but they will never face the threat we prevented. The fire has been moved far from the woodpile, where it can do no harm." The fire, that's how he described it. Not gold, not books, not artifacts. The fire. What burns for centuries without consuming itself? What remains warm, even when it appears dead? What would maesters, dedicated to knowledge and learning, decide was too dangerous to keep in Westeros? Dragon eggs aren't just valuable, they're potential, they're possibility. And for men who'd watched dragons tear the realm apart during the dance, who'd seen the devastation that dragonfire could bring, maybe the idea of destroying that potential entirely seemed reasonable. Or maybe they couldn't bring themselves to destroy it. Maybe instead they just moved it somewhere no one would ever think to look. Power doesn't always come from actual strength. Sometimes it comes from the belief in strength. The symbol of power can be more valuable than power itself, and in the century after dragons died, dragon eggs became exactly that kind of symbol. They weren't weapons anymore. They couldn't breathe fire or carry riders into battle, but they represented legitimacy. They represented the old blood, the true Targaryen lineage, and men went to war over them. Daemon Blackfyre understood symbols. He was the bastard son of King Aegon IV, born to one of the king's many mistresses. But unlike most bastards, Daemon was legitimized on his father's deathbed. Given the name Blackfyre after the Valyrian steel sword Aegon gifted him. He was tall, strong, charismatic, a warrior who could have stepped out of legend, and when King Daeron II took the throne, Daemon's supporters whispered that the wrong son had been crowned. In 196, those whispers turned into open rebellion. Daemon raised his banners, and half the realm followed him. Lords who'd grown resentful of Daeron's policies, knights who believed Daemon was the better man, small folk who'd heard stories of this golden prince and wanted to see him rule. The first Blackfyre Rebellion tore through Westeros for a year, before ending at the Battle of the Redgrass Field, where Daemon died with both his sons beside him. But before the rebellion even started, there were rumors, whispers in taverns and castles, about what Daemon possessed. They said he had dragon eggs, 3 of them hidden away, proof that he was the rightful heir. The eggs of Aegon the Conqueror himself, passed down through generations, now come to the true dragon. The stories varied depending on who told them. Some said the eggs were black as night, others claimed they were gold and silver, but everyone agreed they existed. Except no eggs were ever found. After Daemon fell at Redgrass Field, his camp was searched thoroughly, his possessions were catalogued, his treasures were seized by the crown. If he'd had dragon eggs, they should have been discovered. They weren't, which means either the eggs never existed and were just propaganda, or someone got them out before the battle. Someone loyal enough to Daemon's cause to protect his legacy even after his death. 16 years later, another Blackfyre rose, Daemon II, son of the first. And once again, a dragon egg appeared at the center of the plot. Lord Butterwell, a wealthy noble with Targaryen ancestry, was hosting a tournament at his castle of White Walls. Officially, it was to celebrate his wedding. Unofficially, it was a gathering of Blackfyre supporters planning the Second Rebellion. The prize for winning the tournament was remarkable: a dragon egg, not a fake or a replica. A real dragon egg that had been in the Butterwell family for generations, a gift from King Aegon IV to Lord Butterwell's grandfather. The egg was displayed at the tournament. Guests could see it, locked in a glass case, pale gold with streaks of jade green running through the shell like veins. It was beautiful, and it was bait. The tournament was rigged. Daemon Blackfyre was supposed to win, claiming the egg as his prize. The symbolism would have been perfect. The true dragon, winning the dragon's egg, it would have rallied supporters across the realm. But there was a problem. Brynden Rivers, called Bloodraven, was the hand of the king. He had eyes everywhere, spies in every castle, informants in every city, and he knew exactly what was happening at White Walls. He sent agents to the tournament. One of them was a hedge knight named Duncan the Tall. Though Duncan didn't know he was being used, Duncan just thought he was entering a tournament for the prize money. The night before the final joust, the egg vanished. Someone broke into the chamber where it was kept and took it. Lord Butterwell panicked. He accused a young knight named Glendon Ball of the theft. Ball was arrested, humiliated, nearly executed, but he was innocent. The real thief was never caught, because the real thief was working for Bloodraven. The rebellion collapsed without its symbol. Daemon fled. Butterwell bent the knee, and later Bloodraven told Duncan that the egg had been safely secured, but he never said where. He never said what happened to it. A dragon egg, confirmed to be real, witnessed by dozens of nobles, just disappeared into Bloodraven's possession and was never seen again. Bloodraven eventually took the black and joined the Night's Watch. He became Lord Commander and then ventured beyond the wall, where he disappeared into legend. Did he take the egg with him? There's no record of it. But there's also no record of what happened to most of Bloodraven's possessions when he left for the wall. He was a man who collected secrets the way other men collected gold, and a dragon egg would have been the greatest secret of all. The Blackfyre pretenders didn't end with Daemon II. There were more attempts, more rebellions, and each time there were whispers about eggs. The third Blackfyre Rebellion, the fourth, the fifth, each one featured rumors that the pretender possessed dragon eggs, that they were proof of legitimacy, that they would hatch when the true king claimed his throne. Most historians dismiss these claims as fantasy, propaganda designed to attract followers, and maybe that's true for some of them. But not all propaganda is false. Sometimes the most effective propaganda is built on a core of truth. The last Blackfyre pretender was Meleys the Monstrous, who led the Golden Company during the War of the Ninepenny Kings in 260. Meleys was killed in single combat by a young knight named Barristan Selmy, who would later become Lord Commander of the Kingsguard. After the battle, Meleys' camp was searched. His tent contained chests of gold, weapons, maps, correspondence with allies, and according to one account from a soldier who helped with the search, there were 3 large stones wrapped in silk. The soldier described them as egg-shaped, covered in what looked like scales, warm despite the cool morning air. The official inventory from that day doesn't mention any stones. It lists gold, weapons, personal effects, nothing about eggs. But inventories can be edited, reports can be altered, especially when powerful people decide certain information shouldn't become public. Here's what we know for certain. The Golden Company was founded by Blackfyre loyalists. It exists to this day, one of the most famous sellsword companies in Essos. And the Golden Company has always maintained treasure vaults that only the highest-ranking officers can access. They guard those vaults with their lives. Men have been killed for asking too many questions about what's inside. The company's motto is beneath the gold, the bitter steel. But maybe beneath the steel, there's something else. Something that's been waiting for over a century. 3 eggs kept warm in Essosi heat. preserved by men who still believe that one day a true Targaryen will come to claim them. And when that day arrives, the eggs will prove who has the right to rule. Or maybe that's just another story, another legend. But legends usually start somewhere. And the Blackfyres were many things, but they weren't fools. They wouldn't have risked so much, fought so hard, died so bloodily, all for symbols that didn't exist. They believed in those eggs. They bet their lives on them. The question isn't whether the eggs were real. The question is where they are now. Some disasters happen quickly. A battle lost in an afternoon. A king murdered in a moment. But some disasters build slowly, fed by desperation and hope twisted into obsession. Summerhall was that kind of disaster. It took years to build toward, and when it finally came, it burned away more than just lives. It burned away answers. Aegon V was never supposed to be king. He was the fourth son of a fourth son, so far down the line of succession that becoming king seemed impossible. As a boy, he served as a squire to a hedge knight named Duncan the Tall. They traveled the 7 kingdoms together, sleeping in ditches, eating in taverns, living the kind of life no prince was supposed to live. That experience shaped Aegon in ways that made him different from other Targaryen kings. He cared about common people. He understood their struggles. He remembered cold nights and empty bellies. But caring wasn't enough. When Aegon became king through a series of unlikely deaths and a great council decision, he tried to implement reforms, better treatment for small folk, limits on what lords could demand from their people, fair laws that applied to everyone, not just the powerless. The lords hated it. They resisted at every turn, and without dragons to enforce his will, Aegon had no way to make them obey. So Aegon became obsessed with bringing dragons back. He commissioned expeditions to Asshai and beyond, searching for ancient texts on Valyrian dragon breeding. He consulted with every maester who'd ever studied dragons. He brought in mages from across the narrow sea, promising them gold and land if they could solve the puzzle. How do you hatch a dragon egg? What combination of heat and blood and magic makes the shell crack open and life emerge? His brothers had dragon eggs when they were young. Aegon himself had an egg placed in his cradle as a baby, a beautiful thing with green and white swirls across its surface. He'd kept that egg his whole life, hoping it would hatch. It never did, but he never stopped believing it could. By 259, Aegon was in his 50s. His grandson Aerys had married his granddaughter Rhaella, as Targaryens did, keeping the bloodline pure. Rhaella was pregnant with their first child. The birth was expected in the summer, at Summerhall, the castle Aegon loved most. It seemed like the perfect moment. New life entering the world, the next generation of Targaryens. What better time to try bringing dragons back? Aegon gathered 7 dragon eggs for the ritual. 7. To honor the 7 gods, though some of his advisors thought that mixing the old magic with the new faith was asking for trouble. Where did those eggs come from? Some had been in the royal treasury for decades, leftovers from the Dance of Dragons era. Others came from Dragonstone's vaults, brought to King's Landing years earlier. One might have been Aegon's own childhood egg. Another possibly belonged to his brother Aemon, who'd taken the black and served at the Night's Watch. The plan was to perform the ritual on the night of the birth. They'd use wildfire, the volatile green substance that burns hotter than normal flame. They'd use blood magic, though exactly what kind remains unclear. And they'd use the presence of new Targaryen life, the baby being born, as a catalyst. Birth and rebirth. Life calling to life. It was supposed to work. Aegon believed it would work. He'd staked everything on it. What actually happened remains one of the greatest mysteries in Westerosi history. We have fragments, A letter from Maester Corso, written just before he died in the fire, but most of it is illegible, blotted out by ink stains. We have testimony from a few survivors who were on the castle's edges when the fire started. We have songs and stories, though those always exaggerate, but the core facts are these. The ritual began. Wildfire was involved, and something went catastrophically wrong. The flames didn't stay controlled. They spread through the castle faster than anyone could react. The fire burned hotter than any normal blaze. Stone melted, wooden beams exploded. The entire structure became an inferno that lit up the night sky for miles around. King Aegon died in that fire. His son Duncan, called the Small, died trying to reach him. Seer Duncan the Tall, the Lord Commander of the Kingsguard and Aegon's oldest friend, died in a collapsed hallway. Maester Corso burned in his chambers. Multiple mages and pyromancers were consumed. The exact death toll was never confirmed because so many bodies couldn't be identified. But here's what's strange. Prince Rhaegar was born that night. In the midst of the flames, his mother Rhaella survived. A handful of guards and servants made it out. These people were inside the castle when it burned, yet they lived, which means the fire, intense as it was, wasn't instantly fatal throughout the entire structure. There were moments, precious seconds or minutes, when people could move, could act, could try to save things. And Ser Duncan was found far from where the ritual took place. His body was discovered in a storage chamber, crushed under fallen stone. Why was he there? The ritual was in the main hall. Duncan should have been with the king, but instead he'd gone somewhere else. He'd left his post, abandoned his duty, to reach that specific room. What was in that room? What was important enough to make the Lord Commander leave his king's side in the middle of a disaster? After the fire cooled, after the survivors were evacuated and the dead were counted, a new king took the throne. Jacaerys, Aegon's other son. He ordered a search of the ruins, not a rescue effort because there was no one left to rescue, a recovery effort. Looking for valuables, for records, for anything that survived. That search took weeks. They sifted through collapsed halls and melted stone. They found coins and jewelry. They found fragments of books. They found the crown misshapen from heat but recognizable. They never found any dragon eggs. Not a single shell fragment, not a piece of scale. 7 eggs had been in that castle when the fire started. 7 eggs that should have left some trace, some physical evidence. Dragon eggs don't just evaporate, even if the fire was hot enough to crack them. There should have been remains, but there was nothing. The official conclusion was that they'd been completely destroyed, consumed by heat so intense it left no trace. Except that doesn't quite make sense. Other things survived the fire. Metal objects were warped but intact. Stone, though damaged, remained. Even wood left charred remnants. But dragon eggs, which are denser than stone and famously resistant to fire, those apparently vanished completely. There's another explanation, one that historians have avoided because it requires believing that someone, in the middle of that chaos and terror, managed to save the eggs, that someone grabbed them before the fire consumed everything, that someone got them out of the castle and hid them somewhere safe. Ser Duncan went to that storage chamber for a reason. Maybe he wasn't trying to hide from the fire. Maybe he was trying to save something, and maybe, just maybe, he succeeded. The castle fell on him before he could escape. But if he'd already moved the eggs, if he'd already gotten them to someone who could carry them away, then his death wasn't meaningless. It was a sacrifice. One of the few survivors was a servant boy who later became a soldier. 50 years after Summerhall, as an old man, he told his daughter a story. He said that on the night of the fire, a knight gave him something wrapped in cloth, heavy objects, 3 of them. The knight told him to run, to get as far from the castle as possible, to bury them beneath the roses that grew on the southern slope. The old man said he did as he was told. He ran through the smoke and chaos. He buried the bundle where he'd been instructed, and then he never went back, never checked, never told anyone until the end of his life. His daughter tried to find the location he described, but Summerhall is a ruin now. Roses grow everywhere, wild and untended. The southern slope is covered in them. Digging without knowing exactly where to look would take years, and even if someone found the right spot, even if there's truth to the story, who knows if the eggs are still there? 2 centuries is a long time for something to remain undiscovered. But sometimes I think about those roses, how they grow thicker on that slope than anywhere else. How the locals say that section of ruin always feels warmer even in winter. How thorns seem to grow more viciously there, as if protecting something. Maybe it's just a ruin, just roses and rubble. Or maybe beneath those flowers, beneath that earth, 3 eggs are sleeping, waiting in darkness. Still warm, still viable, still dreaming of the fire they almost became. Dragonstone is older than Westeros itself. The Targaryens built it before Aegon's conquest, before dragons flew over the 7 kingdoms, back when they were just one family among many in Valyria. They carved it from volcanic stone using magic that's been lost for centuries. The castle isn't built so much as shaped, pulled from the mountain like sculpture from clay. Dragon heads loom from towers. Gargoyles with spread wings stand sentinel on walls. Even the stones themselves seem alive in the right light. But the castle you can see is only part of Dragonstone. Beneath it, carved into the volcanic mountain, there's another structure, tunnels and chambers that descend deep into the earth, following veins of heat from the active volcano at the island's heart. The Targaryens built hatcheries down there, special rooms where dragon eggs could be kept at precise temperatures, warmed by the mountain's natural heat, creating perfect conditions for hatching. When dragons were alive and plentiful, those chambers were constantly in use. Dragon keepers would tend the eggs, rotating them, monitoring their warmth, watching for the first signs of cracking. Some eggs hatched within days, others took months or years. A few never hatched at all but remained viable, warm to the touch, waiting for something unknown to trigger their awakening. After the dance of dragons, after most of the dragons died, those chambers became storage instead of nurseries. The eggs that remained were kept there out of tradition and hope. Maybe one would hatch. Maybe the warmth would eventually work its magic. But as years passed and no hatchings occurred, people stopped checking the lower levels. Why visit chambers that only held failure and broken dreams? Then the dragons died completely. The last one perished in 153, and Dragonstone became less important to the Targaryens. They still held it as their ancestral seat, still sent family members to live there occasionally, but it wasn't the center of power anymore. King's Landing was where the realm was ruled. Dragonstone was just a castle on an island, impressive but no longer essential, which made it perfect for hiding things. When the maesters and dragon keepers decided to preserve dragon eggs rather than destroy them, Dragonstone was the obvious choice. The hatcheries already existed. The heat was already there. The castle was isolated enough that curious eyes wouldn't pry. And most importantly, the lower chambers could be sealed. Valyrian magic had built Dragonstone, and Valyrian magic could lock its doors in ways that ordinary keys couldn't open. There are architectural surveys of Dragonstone from various periods, masters studying the castle's construction, trying to understand how it was built. What they consistently found puzzled them. The castle has too much empty space, walls that are thicker than they need to be for structural support, foundations that go deeper than makes sense, basement levels that end in sealed passages leading nowhere, at least nowhere that anyone could find. One survey from 240, conducted by an archmaester named Ryam, notes something specific. He was studying the thermal properties of the castle, trying to understand how the Targaryens managed to keep certain rooms warm year-round. His measurements showed heat sources that didn't correspond to any visible chambers. He wrote that there appeared to be spaces beneath the known basement levels where heat concentrated, sealed spaces that his instruments could detect but that no door or passage could reach. When he asked the castle steward about these anomalies, the steward claimed ignorance. Just quirks of the volcanic rock, he said. Natural caves that happened to trap heat. But Ryam didn't believe that. He wrote in his private notes that the heat patterns were too regular, too precisely maintained. Someone had designed those spaces intentionally, and someone was keeping them sealed for a reason. During Robert's rebellion, Stannis Baratheon was given Dragonstone as his seat after the war ended. He held it for 16 years, ruling the island with his characteristic thoroughness. Stannis was not a man to leave stones unturned. He would have explored the castle completely, catalogued its contents, investigated any mysteries. If there were dragon eggs hidden somewhere in Dragonstone, Stannis should have found them. But there's no record of him discovering anything unusual. No mentions in his reports back to King's Landing. No rumors from his household. Either there was nothing to find, or it was hidden so well that even Stannis's methodical searchers couldn't locate it. Given what we know about Valyrian magic, the second option seems more likely. Valyrian steel is famous because it holds an edge forever and never needs sharpening. But Valyrian magic could do more than just make superior metal. It could bind stone in ways that made it stronger than any mortar. It could create locks that had no keys, doors that opened only for specific bloodlines. The Targaryens were dragon lords, yes, but they were also sorcerers in their own right. They knew secrets that died with them. What if some of the doors in Dragonstone's depths were sealed with blood magic? What if they could only be opened by someone with strong enough Targaryen blood? After generations of intermarriage with other families, after the dragons died and the magic weakened, maybe the current Targaryens simply didn't have enough of the old blood left to trigger those locks. Maybe the doors stayed sealed not because no one tried to open them, but because no one could. Daenerys Targaryen returned to Dragonstone briefly before sailing for Westeros with her army. By that point, she already had 3 dragons. She wasn't looking for eggs. She was focused on conquest, on claiming the Iron Throne that she believed was rightfully hers. She stayed at the castle only a short time before leaving for the mainland. No one recorded her exploring the lower levels. No one mentioned her showing any interest in the old hatcheries. But think about this. Daenerys had something no Targaryen had possessed in over a century. She had living dragons. She had brought magic back into the world. If those sealed doors responded to Targaryen blood, her blood might have been strong enough to open them. If there were eggs in those hidden chambers, she might have sensed them the way she sensed her own eggs before they hatched. She might have felt a pull toward the depths, a calling that she didn't understand. We'll never know if she felt anything. We'll never know if she came close to discovering something that could have changed everything, because she left Dragonstone and never returned. The castle stands now empty again. The volcanic heat still rises through its stones. The sealed chambers, if they exist, remain sealed, and whatever sleeps in those depths continues sleeping. There are locals on Dragonstone, fishermen and servants who've spent their whole lives on the island. Some of them talk about sounds from beneath the castle, deep rumblings that aren't quite like normal volcanic activity, warmth in certain sections of the lower halls that seems to pulse like breathing. They don't go down there anymore. The passages are dangerous, they say. The old stairs are crumbling. But maybe that's not the real reason. Maybe there's something about those depths that makes people uncomfortable. Something that speaks to old instincts, a feeling that some doors are meant to stay closed. How many eggs could be down there? It's impossible to know. Before the dance, Dragonstone's hatcheries held dozens. Not all survived the war, but some did. And if even a fraction of those were moved into sealed chambers, if the dragon keepers hid them away before the castle fell, then there could be 5 eggs down there, 10, maybe more, all sleeping in perfect darkness, warmed by the volcano's heart, waiting for a key that might never turn in the lock. For years, nobody knew where Daenerys Targaryen's 3 eggs actually came from. Illyrio Mopatis, the wealthy magistrate who gave them to her as a wedding gift, claimed they were from the Shadowlands beyond Ashai. Ancient things, he said, turned to stone by the passage of eons. That explanation satisfied most people because it was vague enough to be believable. Ashai was mysterious, distant, a place where strange things happened, and asking too many questions was considered unwise. But the truth is far more specific and far more remarkable. The eggs came from Syrax, the golden dragon ridden by Princess Rhaenyra Targaryen during the Dance of the Dragons. Syrax was known to be a prolific layer, producing multiple clutches throughout her life. And in the early days of the Civil War, before everything collapsed into chaos and death, Rhaenyra made a decision that would echo across nearly 2 centuries. She gave 4 eggs to her stepdaughter Rhaenyra, 4 eggs from Syrax's most recent clutch. Rhaenyra was being sent away to the Vale of Arryn, tasked with protecting Rhaenyra's 3 young sons. If the war was lost, if the Blacks were defeated, and everyone loyal to Rhaenyra was killed, those eggs represented the future. They were insurance. A chance for dragons to return someday, even if that someday was generations away. Rhaenyra told Rhaenyra something that we know from historical records. She said that if everything came to ruin, if the cause was lost and the family destroyed, Rhaenyra and those eggs would be their hope for the future. It wasn't just about preserving dragon eggs as curiosities or symbols. It was about preserving the possibility of dragons themselves. The species, the magic, the fire that had defined House Targaryen since before Aegon's conquest. Rhaenyra took those 4 eggs to the Vale. She prayed over them every night. She kept them close, sleeping with them for warmth, the way Targaryens had done for generations. And during the war, one of those eggs hatched, a small dragon with pale pink scales that Rhaenyra named Morning. Morning would be the last Targaryen dragon to hatch for over 150 years. She lived into adulthood, but never grew large, never laid eggs of her own. When she died sometime after 136, the age of dragons seemed to die with her. But the other 3 eggs didn't hatch. They remained stubbornly dormant. Rhaenyra kept them anyway. They were too precious to abandon, too important to give up on. She maintained them even as they slowly petrified, their shells hardening, their warmth fading into the dull coolness of stone. By the time Rhaenyra died in 153, those eggs appeared completely dead. Expensive stones, beautiful but useless. What happened to them after Rhaenyra's death gets murky. Records from that period are incomplete. The Targaryens were dealing with the aftermath of the dance, trying to rebuild their power without dragons to enforce their will. 3 petrified eggs weren't a priority. They were inheritance, passed down through the family like jewelry or furniture, valuable because of what they represented, not because anyone thought they'd ever hatch. Somewhere in the following decades, those eggs left Westeros. Maybe they were given as gifts during diplomatic negotiations. The Targaryens needed allies and gold, and dragon eggs, even dead ones, were worth fortunes. Maybe they were sold quietly during one of the family's financial troubles. Or maybe they were stolen, smuggled out by someone who recognized their value even in petrified form. We don't know the exact route they took, but we know they ended up in Essos. Illyrio claimed the eggs came from Ashai, and that might actually be partially true. Not in origin, but in journey. The eggs could have traveled east over the decades, passing through multiple hands, multiple cities, Bravos to Volantis. Volantis to Koth, Koth to Asshai. In Asshai, where shadowbinders and sorcerers practiced magic that was forbidden elsewhere, someone might have recognized what the eggs truly were. Not dead, not exactly, just sleeping very, very deeply. Asshai is a strange place by all accounts. The city is built entirely of black stone, and no children are ever born there. Magic works differently in Asshai than anywhere else in the world. Things that should be impossible become merely difficult, and dragon eggs, exposed to that concentrated magic for years or decades, might have retained more life than anyone realized. The petrification might have slowed or even partially reversed. The eggs might have absorbed power from their surroundings the way plants absorb sunlight. Eventually, through means we can only guess at, the eggs made their way back west to Pentos, into Illyrio's possession. He was a collector of rare things, a man whose wealth allowed him to purchase items that had no practical use but immense historical value. 3 dragon eggs, even petrified ones, were the ultimate collector's prize. He kept them for years before giving them to Daenerys, and when he did give them, he never expected them to hatch. Nobody did. They were meant to be symbolic. A reminder of what House Targaryen once was, a beautiful, tragic gift. But here's what makes this story so extraordinary. Those eggs, from the moment they were laid by Syrax, were maintained by people who believed in dragons. Rhaenyra chose them specifically. She didn't grab random eggs from the hatcheries. She selected these 4 from Syrax's clutch, probably the most recent, the freshest, the ones with the best chance of eventually hatching. Rhaenyra prayed over them for years, kept them warm, spoke to them. Even after she died, the eggs passed through Targaryen hands for generations. People who, despite all evidence to the contrary, maintained a tiny flicker of faith that dragons could return. And that faith, that care, that centuries of handling by people with dragon blood in their veins, it might have mattered. Dragon eggs aren't just biological objects. They're magical. They respond to things we don't fully understand. Intent matters. Belief matters. Blood certainly matters. So when those eggs finally ended up with Daenerys, when she placed them in Khal Drogo's funeral pyre, along with the witch whose blood magic had already saturated the air, when Daenerys herself walked into the flames, the eggs remembered what they were meant to be. They hatched, and in hatching, they proved that Rhaenyra had been right. The eggs were hope for the future, just not the immediate future, not the next generation, or even the generation after that, the future that came 169 years later, when her descendant Daenerys Targaryen stepped out of fire with 3 dragons and changed the world. Think about the chain of decisions that had to happen for this to work. Rhaenyra had to choose those specific eggs. Rhaenyra had to protect them through the war. Someone had to preserve them after Rhaenyra died. Multiple people across multiple generations had to recognize their value and keep them safe. The eggs had to travel to Asshai at exactly the right time to absorb magic that kept them viable. Rhaenyra had to acquire them and then give them to Daenerys rather than selling them or keeping them. Daenerys had to be desperate enough, broken enough, faithful enough to walk into fire with them. Any break in that chain, any different decision, and the eggs would never have hatched. They'd be decorations in some Pentoshi mansion, or lost at sea, or smashed by accident, or simply left somewhere to finish turning into stone. But every link held, every person who touched those eggs, knowingly or not, played their part in preserving them until the moment was right. Now, there's one detail that historians argue about. Rhaenyra gave Rhaenyra 4 eggs. 1 hatched into morning during the dance. 3 remained dormant and eventually became Drogon, Rhaegal, and Viserion. But what about Morning herself? She lived for years after the war ended. She was a female dragon. Did she ever lay eggs? The records don't say. Morning was small and weak by dragon standards. She might not have been capable of reproduction. Or maybe she laid eggs that never hatched. adding to the collection of dormant eggs scattered across the realm. Or maybe she did lay eggs, and those eggs are still out there somewhere, another branch of Syrax's legacy waiting in darkness. We'll probably never know, but it's worth considering, because if Morning laid even one clutch before she died, if those eggs were preserved the way Rhaenyra's eggs were preserved, then there might be more of Syrax's children sleeping in hidden places, more chances for dragons to return, more hope tucked away in forgotten corners, waiting for fire and blood and desperate faith to wake them. What we know for certain is this: 3 eggs, laid by Syrax sometime around 128 or 129, maintained by Targaryens for over a century, traveled across the world and back, and hatched in 298 to produce the first dragons in 150 years. They fulfilled exactly the purpose Rhaenyra intended when she sent them away with Rhaenys. They were hope for the future. They were the survival of magic itself. And they proved that dragon eggs, even when they seem dead, even when centuries have passed and all faith has faded, they're just sleeping, waiting for the right fire, the right blood, the right moment to crack open and show the world that some things refuse to die. The North remembers, that's what they say. The North remembers everything. Old slights and older debts. Ancient oaths and forgotten promises. And if the North remembers, then maybe the North is also keeping secrets that the rest of the realm has long forgotten. Winterfell is old, not as old as Dragonstone, but old enough that its origins blur into legend. Brandon the Builder supposedly constructed it 8,000 years ago, though that number is probably exaggerated the way all ancient numbers get exaggerated in the retelling. What we know is that Winterfell has been the seat of House Stark since before written history, and beneath Winterfell, descending deep into the earth, the crypts hold every Stark lord and king who ever ruled the North. Those crypts are extensive. The upper levels are well maintained, visited regularly by the family, lit by torches. Stone kings sit on stone thrones, iron swords across their laps to keep restless spirits from walking. But the deeper you go, the older it gets. Eventually you reach levels that are partially collapsed. Passages that haven't been explored in living memory. Sections where the darkness is absolute, and the cold seeps into your bones, despite the hot springs that run beneath the castle. Nobody goes to the deepest levels anymore. There's no reason to. The Starks bury their recent dead in the upper crypts. The lower sections are just history. Stone and dust and the bones of men who died so long ago. Their names have been forgotten. At least, that's what everyone assumes. But there's a story. A ridiculous story, really. Something a fool named Mushroom claimed in his testimony about the Dance of the Dragons. Mushroom was a dwarf who served as a jester in King's Landing during the war. His accounts are notoriously unreliable, full of sexual innuendo and exaggeration. Maesters generally dismiss most of what he wrote as the ravings of someone trying to make history more entertaining than it actually was. Except sometimes Mushroom's wild claims turn out to be true, and one of his wildest claims was about Winterfell. He wrote that Prince Cacary's Valyrian visited Winterfell during the dance. That part is definitely true. Cacary's flew north on his dragon Vermax to negotiate an alliance with Lord Cregan Stark. The North's support was crucial for Rhaenyra's cause, and Cacary secured it through a pact that would bind their houses. That's all documented in reliable sources. But Mushroom added something else. He claimed that while Jacaerys was at Winterfell, his dragon Vermax laid eggs in the crypts, left them there, hidden deep beneath the castle, in the cold and darkness where no one would think to look for dragon eggs. The maesters dismiss this for one simple reason. They believe Vermax was male, and male dragons don't lay eggs. Therefore Mushroom must have invented the story. It's exactly the kind of dramatic detail he'd add to make his account more interesting. Except the maesters weren't as certain about Vermax's sex as they claimed to be. Dragon biology was never fully understood, even by the Targaryens who bred them for centuries. Determining a dragon's sex wasn't always straightforward. Some dragons that were assumed to be male later proved to be female when they unexpectedly laid eggs. The reverse was also true. Dragons might be hermaphroditic, or their sex might change based on environmental factors. Nobody knows. So maybe Vermax was female, or maybe Vermax was something in between. And maybe while Jacaerys was in Winterfell negotiating with Cregan Stark, his dragon did exactly what Mushroom claimed, laid eggs in the depths of the crypts, hidden them there, either by instinct or by Jacaerys' direction. Think about the timing. This was early in the dance, before things turned completely catastrophic. Jacaerys was Rhaenyra's son, her heir. He understood the importance of preserving dragon eggs. He'd seen his mother carefully protect Syrax's eggs, sending some away with Rhaenyra for safekeeping. If Vermax laid eggs while they were in the north, why wouldn't Jacaerys hide them? Winterfell was thousands of miles from the fighting. The Starks were loyal allies, and the crypts were perfect storage. Cold, yes, but constant temperature, secure, forgotten by everyone except the family who controlled them. Jacaerys died later in the war, killed at sea during a naval battle. If he'd hidden eggs at Winterfell, he never had a chance to retrieve them. Vermax died too, in the same battle. Whatever secrets they shared died with them. And the eggs, if they existed, remained in the darkness beneath Winterfell, waiting in cold that might actually have helped preserve them, the way ice preserves bodies for centuries. That's one possible cache of northern eggs. But there's another story, a more recent one, and potentially more credible. Rhaegar Targaryen was obsessed with prophecy. He believed deeply in the prince that was promised, the prophesied hero who would save the world from darkness. He thought he was that prince, at first. Then he thought his son would be. That belief drove many of his decisions, including his relationship with Lyanna Stark. When Rhaegar and Lyanna disappeared together, when they hid at the Tower of Joy in Dawn, Rhaegar knew war was coming. He wasn't stupid. He understood that taking Lyanna would provoke her father and her betrothed. He knew Robert Baratheon would raise armies to get her back. He knew his own father, the Mad King Aerys, was unstable and might make everything worse. Rhaegar was preparing for the possibility that he'd die in the coming war. So what would a man who believed in prophecy do in that situation? A man who thought his unborn son was destined to save the world. He'd make provisions, he'd secure resources, he'd leave something behind for that son to find when he came of age. Rhaegar had access to the royal treasury before he left King's Landing. He could have taken things, valuable things, important things, and if he took dragon eggs, where would he hide them? Not at the Tower of Joy. That location would be discovered eventually, somewhere more permanent, somewhere connected to his son's heritage. Lyanna was a Stark. Their son would have Stark blood, along with Targaryen blood. And the Starks had ruled Winterfell for thousands of years, keeping their own secrets in those deep crypts. If Rhaegar wanted to hide something for his son, something that combined both parts of the boy's heritage, Winterfell would be the perfect choice. Did Rhaegar visit Winterfell before the Tower of Joy? The timeline is tight but possible. Or did he send someone he trusted? A messenger carrying precious cargo, delivering it to a specific location with specific instructions. We don't know. There's no record of such a visit, but there wouldn't be. That's the entire point of hiding something. You don't leave records. What we do know is that Ned Stark, after finding Lyanna dying at the Tower of Joy, brought her body back to Winterfell and buried her in the crypts. He placed a statue over her tomb, which was unusual. Typically only ruling lords and kings received statues. Lyanna was a young woman who died before her time, not a ruler, but Ned honored her that way, regardless. And Ned kept Jon's parentage secret for 16 years. He lied to everyone, including his wife, to protect his nephew. He bore the shame of supposed infidelity, damaged his marriage, lived with that burden every day. If he'd lie about Jon's very existence, if he'd carry that secret to his grave, what else would he keep hidden? Howland Reed was with Ned at the Tower of Joy. He's the only other person who survived that confrontation, the only other person who knows exactly what happened. And Howland Reed has never spoken about it, not to his children, not to anyone. He's kept that silence for decades. Men don't keep silence that perfectly, unless they're protecting something specific, something they swore never to reveal. The crypts of Winterfell run deep, deeper than most people realize. There are collapsed sections that haven't been explored in generations, places where the stone has fallen and blocked passages, places where you'd need to dig through rubble to reach the chambers beyond. If someone wanted to hide eggs in those crypts, if they wanted to ensure those eggs wouldn't be found until the right person came looking with the right knowledge, those collapsed sections would be ideal. And there's one more detail worth considering. The crypts aren't just cold, they're warm in certain places. Hot springs run beneath Winterfell, feeding the walls, keeping the castle habitable even in the depths of northern winter. Some sections of the crypts are near those springs, close enough that the temperature would be perfect. Not volcanic heat like Dragonstone, but steady warmth, consistent, the kind of conditions that might keep eggs viable for years, decades, centuries. So maybe Mushroom was right. Maybe Vermax did lay eggs beneath Winterfell during the dance. Or maybe Rhaegar hid eggs there before the rebellion. Or maybe both things happened, separated by 150 years, two different caches in the same massive crypts. Or maybe there's nothing down there except stone and bones and the weight of forgotten history. But I think about Jon Snow sometimes, about what he could have been, about the secret of his parentage that was revealed too late to matter, and I wonder if there's another secret still waiting. A birthright buried beneath his mother's tomb. A legacy left by a father he never knew. 3 eggs or 4, sleeping in darkness, waiting for someone with both ice and fire in their blood to come and wake them. When you lay out all the evidence, when you track the movement of dragon eggs across 3 centuries of chaos and secrecy, a pattern emerges, not a conspiracy, exactly. More like a collective unconscious decision made by dozens of people who never coordinated with each other, but all arrived at the same conclusion. Don't destroy the eggs. Hide them. Preserve them. Wait. Let's add it up. Start with the Dance of the Dragons in 129. Before the war, there were at least 15 to 20 dragon eggs in various Targaryen holdings. That's a conservative estimate based on breeding records and historical accounts. Syrax alone had laid multiple clutches. Dreamfire had produced eggs over her long lifetime. Other dragons had contributed to the royal hatcheries. These eggs were valuable but not rare. They were the future of House Targaryen, insurance against disaster. Then the war happened. Dragons died, castles burned, and when the smoke cleared, only 4 or 5 eggs could be accounted for in official records. That's a gap of 10 to 15 eggs, 10 to 15 pieces of the future that simply vanished from history. The official explanation has always been chaos. War destroys things. Records are lost. Eggs were probably consumed in fires, or lost at sea, or buried under collapsed buildings. And certainly some eggs were genuinely lost that way. But all of them, when the people responsible for those eggs were dragon keepers who dedicated their lives to protecting dragons. When the Targaryens themselves knew that eggs were irreplaceable. No, the more likely explanation is deliberate concealment. And once you accept that premise, once you start looking for evidence of preservation rather than destruction, you find it everywhere. The Dragon Pit Massacre. The official story says 5 dragons died, and whatever eggs were in the lower chambers were destroyed by the mob. But we have testimony from a dragon keeper who escaped. He said he grabbed that which must not be lost before fleeing. Why be vague about what he saved? Why not just say gold or documents? Because saying he saved dragon eggs would make them a target. Better to let everyone assume they were destroyed. Dragonstone changing hands during the war. Daenerys sealed certain chambers before the castle fell. Why seal chambers unless you're protecting something inside? And after the war, when Aegon's forces searched the castle, they found dragon artifacts but never specified what. Convenient vagueness that suggests they found things they chose not to document. The ships that sank in Blackwater Bay. Prince Viserys was captured, his ship taken, his personal egg vanished. But if you're a pirate who just captured a Targaryen prince and you find a dragon egg in his possessions, are you going to document that in manifests that authorities might see? Or are you going to quietly sell it in Essos for more gold than you'd make in 10 years of piracy? Move forward 50 years. King Balor decides dragon eggs should go to the Citadel for study. The eggs arrive. Then nothing. No research papers, no announcements, just silence. But we have financial records showing the Citadel paying large sums to Braavosi contractors for secure storage solutions. We have accounts of sealed chambers in the Citadel's depths that radiate heat. We have a junior maester's diary entry about finding a locked door that was warm to the touch. Jump ahead another century. The Blackfyre Rebellions. Multiple pretenders claim to have dragon eggs as proof of legitimacy. Most historians dismiss these claims as propaganda, but the White Wall's egg was real, confirmed by dozens of witnesses. Bloodraven seized it and said it was safely secured, but never said where. He later went beyond the wall and disappeared. Did he take it with him? Hide it somewhere else? The egg that everyone saw at that tournament didn't just cease to exist. And Meleys the monstrous. The last Blackfyre pretender. After he died, his tent was searched. A soldier reported finding 3 large-scaled stones that were warm despite the morning air. The official inventory doesn't mention them, but the Golden Company still exists, still maintains sealed vaults that only senior officers can access, still guards something with their lives. Summerhall in 259. 7 eggs brought for a ritual that ended in catastrophe. No egg fragments found in the ruins despite extensive searching. The maesters concluded the eggs were completely destroyed, but Sir Duncan the Tall was found far from where the ritual took place. He died in a storage chamber, going there for some reason important enough to abandon his post. And an old soldier told his daughter a story about being given 3 heavy objects to bury beneath roses. Track the money, the Citadel paying for storage. The faceless men receiving large fees for transportation services. The Iron Bank accepting deposits of geological specimens requiring temperature control. These are expensive operations. You don't spend that kind of money on worthless stones. You spend it on things that might someday be incredibly valuable. Consider the locations. Every place where eggs allegedly disappeared has specific advantages for long-term preservation. Dragonstone has volcanic heat. The Citadel has controlled environments. Braavos has the faceless men's security. Asshai has concentrated magic. Winterfell has consistent cold and hot springs. Summerhall has overgrown ruins where no one looks. These aren't random hiding spots. They're chosen specifically for their preservation qualities. And consider who knew. Dragon keepers passing information to their successors. Masters in the Citadel maintaining sealed chambers across generations. The Golden Company guarding vaults for over a century. Howland Reed keeping silence about what happened at the Tower of Joy. These aren't isolated incidents. They're part of a pattern where knowledge is carefully preserved and passed down, kept secret from most people but not lost. Different groups had different motivations. The Dragon Keepers loved dragons and wanted to preserve them for their own sake. The maesters wanted to control magical knowledge, keep it contained but not destroyed. The Blackfyres needed proof of legitimacy and kept eggs as symbols. Rhaegar believed in prophecy and left eggs as birthright for his son. But despite different motivations, they all did the same thing. They hid eggs, protected them, waited. Why? Because destroying them felt wrong. Even for people who feared dragons, even for those who believed dragons were dangerous or unnatural, actually destroying the last eggs was a step too far. It was burning books. It was erasing history. It was closing a door that could never be reopened. Better to hide them, control access, wait and see if they'd ever be needed again. And then Daenerys proved they were right to wait. 3 eggs that had been petrified for over a century. 3 eggs that everyone said were dead stone. She walked into fire, and they hatched. Dragons returned. Magic came back to the world, and suddenly everyone who'd hidden eggs, everyone who'd preserved them against all logic, their faith was justified. But Daenerys only had 3 eggs, 3 out of potentially 40 or more that disappeared across those centuries, which means the others are still out there, still hidden, still waiting. And now that the world knows eggs can hatch, now that we've seen it happen, the question isn't whether the other eggs exist, the question is who's going to find them first. There are at least 5 confirmed locations where eggs likely remain. Dragonstone's sealed vaults, the Citadel's restricted chambers, the Golden Company's treasury, Winterfell's deep crypts, Summerhall's ruins. Each location has its own challenges. Dragonstone requires Targaryen blood to open sealed doors. The Citadel would never willingly give up its collection. The Golden Company would fight to the death to protect their vault. Winterfell's crypts are partially collapsed and would take years to excavate properly. Summerhall is buried under roses and rubble, with no clear indicators of where to dig. But they're findable. With enough resources, enough determination, enough willingness to push past the protections and obstacles, someone could recover those eggs. And if they did, if they found 10 eggs or 20 eggs or more, if they gathered them all in one place and somehow figured out the right ritual or the right sacrifice to wake them, what would happen? Would we see the dance of the dragons again? Would new dragon lords fight for supremacy? Or would the eggs bring something else? A new age of magic, a defense against threats we don't yet see coming? Or would they bring nothing but disappointment, refusing to hatch no matter what anyone tries? The eggs are waiting. That's the only certainty. Hidden in vaults and crypts and ruins, protected by magic and distance and time, sleeping, dreaming, remembering what they used to be and what they might become again. And the world has changed around them. The Targaryens are scattered. The realm is broken. Magic is thin and uncertain, but the eggs remain, patient as stones, stubborn as life, waiting for fire, for blood, for someone desperate or faithful or insane enough to try waking them one more time. So here we are, at the end of the trail. 3 centuries of mysteries, dozens of eggs scattered across the known world, countless people who kept secrets and took them to their graves. And what have we learned? What's the truth beneath all the rumors and legends and carefully maintained silences? The truth is simple, though it took us this long to see it clearly. The dragon eggs were never destroyed. Not at Summerhall, not during the dance, not by the maesters or the faith or anyone else. Every time history tells us eggs were lost or consumed or turned to worthless stone, what actually happened was preservation. Someone, somewhere, made the choice to save them rather than let them be destroyed. At Summerhall, Sir Duncan the Tall didn't die fleeing the fire. He died going back into it. He went to that storage chamber because he knew what was there. He knew that if the ritual failed, if the castle burned, those 7 eggs were the last real chance for dragons to return. and he saved at least 3 of them, getting them to a servant with instructions to bury them beneath the roses. Those eggs are still there, sleeping under wild thorns and fallen stone, waiting in darkness for someone to remember where they were hidden. The Citadel didn't destroy the eggs they collected under Baelor's orders. They locked them away in vaults that few maesters even know exist. 4 eggs, maybe more, kept at controlled temperatures in chambers beneath Old Town. The maesters told themselves they were protecting dangerous knowledge, keeping it contained until the world was ready. But really they just couldn't bring themselves to destroy something so unique, so they hid them and pretended they'd done their duty. The Golden Company has 3 eggs, real viable eggs that came from various Blackfyre supporters over the decades. They've guarded those eggs for over a century, passing the duty from one generation to the next. The eggs are their symbol of legitimacy. They're proof that the cause isn't finished. Someday they believe a true Targaryen will come to claim them. And when that happens, when dragons hatch from eggs the company has protected all these years, everything they've fought for will be justified. In Braavos, in the deepest vaults of the Iron Bank, or perhaps in the House of Black and White, more eggs rest. The ones relocated by the Citadel in the 170s. The ones transported by faceless men under contracts that required absolute secrecy. 4 to 6 eggs, kept warm by methods that blend banking practicality with assassin mysticism. The Braavosi know what they have. They're merchants and pragmatists. They'll keep those eggs until someone comes with enough gold or enough leverage to claim them. Beneath Dragonstone, in chambers sealed by Valyrian magic, anywhere from 5 to 10 eggs wait. These are the oldest cache, the ones hidden during the Dance of the Dragons itself. Dragon keepers sealed them behind doors that only strong Targaryen blood can open. They've been there for nearly 200 years, warmed by volcanic heat, protected by magic that most people think is dead. But magic isn't dead, it's just sleeping, like the eggs themselves. And in Winterfell's crypts, 2 or 3 eggs lie in collapsed passages near Lyanna Stark's tomb. Maybe they came from Vermax during the dance. Maybe Rhaegar left them there for the son he'd never meet. Maybe both caches exist in different parts of those vast underground chambers. The North keeps its secrets well. The cold preserves things that heat would destroy. And the Starks, for all their honor and straightforwardness, know how to stay silent when silence is required. Add it all up. Conservative estimate, there are at least 25 dragon eggs still in existence. Optimistic estimate, there could be 40. That's not counting any that might be in private collections, forgotten in attics, lost at sea in shipwrecks that could theoretically be found. Just the ones we can trace through historical records and reasonable inference. 25 to 40 eggs, each one a potential dragon, each one a piece of magic that refuses to die. Now, here's the uncomfortable question that we have to ask. Should someone try to find them? Should someone gather these eggs and attempt to hatch them, or are they better left hidden? There's no simple answer. Dragons brought wonder to the world. They made the impossible possible. They allowed humans to fly, to command fire, to reshape the land itself. The Targaryens united the 7 kingdoms largely because they had dragons. Without them, Aegon the Conqueror would have just been another ambitious warlord who died trying to take a throne that wasn't his. But dragons also brought devastation. The Dance of the Dragons killed thousands, cities burned, armies were incinerated, and that was Targaryens fighting Targaryens, people who at least theoretically knew how to control dragons. What happens if eggs hatch for someone without that knowledge, without that blood? What if dragons bond with people who don't have the temperament or wisdom to wield that kind of power responsibly? Daenerys showed us both possibilities. Her dragons helped defeat the White Walkers. They broke slave cities and freed thousands. They inspired people and changed the balance of power across 2 continents. But they also burned innocents. caused destruction that their rider couldn't always control or predict. And in the end, the cost of having dragons might have outweighed the benefits. So maybe the eggs are better off hidden. Maybe the people who chose to lock them away were wiser than we give them credit for. They preserved the possibility of dragons without inflicting dragons on a world that might not be ready for them. They put the decision off for future generations. Let our descendants decide, they said. We'll keep the eggs safe until someone worthy comes along. If that person ever comes. But there's another way to look at it. The eggs aren't weapons. They're not tools. They're living things. Or at least potentially living things. They're a species that's been pushed to the edge of extinction and preserving endangered species, protecting them even when it's difficult or inconvenient. That's not just about utility. It's about recognizing that some things have value simply by existing. Dragons are part of the world's history, part of its magic. Losing them entirely would make the world smaller somehow, less wondrous, more predictable, and predictability, safety. The absence of magic, these things have their own costs. A cost measured in lost imagination, lost possibility, lost connection to something larger and stranger and more magnificent than ourselves. The eggs sleep now in their various hiding places, beneath castles and inside vaults, under roses and behind locked doors. Each one dreams in whatever way eggs dream. They remember flying, even though they've never flown. They remember fire, even though they've never burned. And they wait with a patience that only things caught between life and death can manage. Howland Reed sits in Greywater Watch, the only living person who knows for certain what Ned Stark buried beneath Winterfell. He's old now. The secret weighs on him. Someday soon he'll die, and take that knowledge with him unless he passes it to his children. Maybe he will, maybe he won't. Maybe he'll decide some secrets are meant to die. The Archmasters of the Citadel maintain their restricted vaults. New maesters arrive, forge their chains, serve the realm. Most never learn about the chambers beneath the library, the ones that radiate heat, the ones that hold stones that aren't quite stones. The knowledge passes from one Archmaester to another in whispered conversations and coded letters. They'll keep the eggs safe, they tell themselves. They'll protect the world from magic it isn't ready for, and they'll never quite admit that they're also protecting the magic from a world that might destroy it. The Golden Company trains new recruits and takes new contracts. Officers swear oaths of secrecy and guard vaults they'll never discuss. Someday, they believe, a true dragon will come to claim what's rightfully theirs. Whether they're right or not doesn't matter. The belief sustains them, gives meaning to their exile, turns mercenary work into something larger, something almost holy. And at Dragonstone, waves crash against volcanic rock. The castle stands empty more often than not. Its lower chambers remain sealed. The heat still rises from the mountain below. The magic that locked those doors hasn't faded as much as people think. It's just waiting. Waiting for blood strong enough to wake it. Blood that might not exist anymore, or might walk the world without knowing what it could open. The eggs don't care about politics or history. They don't care who finds them or when or why. They just exist in their strange state between living and not living. Warm stones that dream of fire, scales that remember flight. Magic compressed into oval forms, patient as mountains, stubborn as life itself. Will they ever hatch? Maybe, maybe not. Daenerys proved it was possible, but she had unique circumstances. Blood magic and funeral pyres and desperate faith all combining at the right moment. Recreating those conditions would be difficult, perhaps impossible. But then again, people said hatching eggs was impossible right up until it happened. The world has changed since Daenerys' dragons flew. Magic has faded again. The great threats have been defeated or driven back. Life has returned to something approaching normal, at least for those who survived the wars. Maybe this is a better world, safer, more stable. A world where dragon eggs can stay hidden and everyone can sleep soundly, knowing that fire and blood won't rain from the sky. Or maybe this world is missing something. Maybe in making ourselves safe, we've made ourselves small. Maybe we need dragons more than we want to admit. Not for conquest or destruction, but for the reminder that impossible things can happen, that magic exists even when we can't see it, that somewhere, hidden in darkness, life waits to emerge if given the right spark. The eggs will wait. That's what they do. They've waited through the dance of the dragons, through the extinction of their kind, through Baise's purges and the Blackfyre Rebellions, through Summerhall's flames and Robert's rebellion, through every disaster and every age. They've waited through silence and forgetting, through being dismissed as stones and overlooked as decorations. And they'll keep waiting. Under Dragonstone's volcanic heart, in Old Town's sealed chambers, within the Golden Company's guarded vault, beneath Winterfell's cold stones, under Summerhall's roses, in Braavos behind assassin doors, they'll wait through this age and the next, through war and peace, through magic's ebb and flow. Because waiting is what dragon eggs do. They don't age, don't decay, don't give up. They just sleep and dream and wait for fire that may never come, or for fire that will come tomorrow, or centuries from now. Time means nothing to them. They've already waited longer than any human lifetime. They can wait longer still. The sun sets over Dragonstone tonight. The castle's shadow stretches across black rocks and dark water. Deep below, behind walls that haven't opened in 200 years, something sleeps. In Winterfell, snow falls on ancient stones. In the crypts beneath, darkness holds its secrets. At Summerhall, roses bloom over ruins. Their roots reach deep. In Old Town, maesters study by candlelight, unaware of what rests in chambers they'll never see. All across the world, in hidden places, in forgotten corners, dragon eggs dream. They dream of skies they've never seen, of riders they've never known, of fire they've never breathed, and in dreaming they wait, patient as stone, alive as hope, real as history, and mysterious as magic. Maybe they'll hatch tomorrow. Maybe they'll never hatch. Maybe they're exactly where they should be, sleeping in darkness, keeping magic alive by existing without awakening. Or maybe someday someone will find them, someone with the right blood, or the right faith, or the right desperate need, and the shells will crack, and dragons will emerge, blinking in light they've never known, ready to fly in skies that have forgotten them. Until then they sleep, and the world turns, and history moves forward. And in the deep places, in the dark places, in the warm places and cold places, the eggs wait. They've always waited. They'll always wait, because some things refuse to die. Some possibilities refuse to close, and some magic, no matter how deeply buried or carefully hidden, refuses to fade away completely. The dragons are sleeping. But sleeping isn't death, it's just waiting. And waiting is something dragons have learned to do very, very well. Rest now, as the dragon eggs rest, dream, as they dream of ancient skies and distant dawns, of mysteries hidden and secrets kept. The dragons may wake tomorrow, or in 1,000 years, or never. But tonight in the darkness, in the quiet, they sleep, and so can you. Good night.